They forgot me at the mall before Christmas dinner. When I called, Mom whispered, "Oh no, we thought you were in the other car." That lie, told so softly it almost passed as concern, cracked open something in me that had been patched and repatched too many times. I stood under a string of mall lights, clutching shopping bags and blinking into the cold. My name is Robin Wright. I'm 36 years old, living in Charlotte, North Carolina. I work as a senior finance officer for a nonprofit health foundation, the kind of place where people smile more than they mean it. But the mission still matters. At home, I managed more than budgets. I handled household expenses, planned family birthdays, created tuition funds, and made sure my stepmother Janelle's credit card never bounced during her yoga retreats. I didn't mind, or at least I told myself I didn't. When my mother died of a stroke 15 years ago, I was 21 and still in college. My father, Philip, fell apart quietly and efficiently, like a man trained to suppress pain until it calcified into productivity. 6 months after the funeral, he met Janelle, and 3 months after that, they were married. No conversation, no warning. One weekend, he was eating Chinese leftovers on the couch with me, and the next, he was trimming gardenias with her on a shared Facebook story. Janelle came with a 5-year-old daughter, Eden, and later gave birth to Logan, my half-brother, 2 years after the wedding. I welcomed them both with cautious optimism. I didn't want to resent them. I wanted it to work. But over time, the language shifted. Our family became the 4 of us. I was introduced at parties as Philip's daughter from his first marriage. I lived upstairs in the guest room. Even though I'd grown up in that house, I kept doing what I always did, showing up, stepping in, helping out. I paid for Eden's orthodontist consultation when Janelle's insurance lapsed. I booked Logan's basketball summer camp when the family account ran low. I didn't expect medals or thank yous. I just wanted to feel like I belonged. This Christmas, I went all out. Maybe part of me hoped they'd finally see me. I spent 2 weeks planning a perfect dinner menu, one that balanced everyone's dietary quirks. I ordered monogram stockings stitched with gold thread. I even had a photographer booked to capture our Christmas morning. Janelle wanted a new set of family portraits to hang above the mantel this year. I was determined not to be cropped out. On Christmas Eve, we realized we were short on a few items, and the family decided to split up for a quick trip to the mall. I was asked to pick up the special spice rub for the roast and a charm bracelet Janelle had admired in a shop window the week before. I said yes, without hesitation, already making a mental list of the stores and their locations. We agreed to meet at the parking lot by Macy's at 4:30. I was 5 minutes late. I sent a message to our family chat as I rushed past frantic shoppers, arms full of bags. No reply. Maybe they were in a dead zone. I waited. 15 minutes passed. I called Dad, straight to voicemail. Janelle's line rang twice, then silence. My stomach began to tighten, and my coat suddenly felt too thin. I texted again. Still nothing. Eventually, Janelle picked up. Her voice sounded high and airy, like she was narrating a meditation app. I asked where they were. Her pause was too long. "Oh no, we thought you were in the other car." There was no other car. We had taken the family SUV together. No one else drove. "What other car?" I asked. My voice steady, but my hands had already started shaking. "Logan said you were with Dad," she replied, "and Dad thought you went with me. They were already halfway home. She suggested I take an Uber, said the snow was picking up, and dinner prep couldn't wait." That was when I knew. This wasn't a miscommunication. It wasn't an accident. It was a decision, and I had been the only one not in on it. Outside, the snow had thickened, coating the windshield wipers and clinging to my boots. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I simply stood in the cold, holding everything I had bought for them, and began walking toward the exit. I wasn't angry yet. I was stunned. That stunned silence where your body understands something before your mind agrees to believe it. They had left me behind. On Christmas Eve, in a crowded mall, on purpose. But the real wound wasn't just the abandonment. It was realizing how long I had accepted being tolerated instead of loved. That night, as I began the long walk back through the snow, something inside me began to shift. The wind hit harder once I stepped past the last set of automatic doors, and the air had shifted from brisk to punishing. My coat wasn't meant for this, but I tightened the belt, adjusted the straps of the shopping bags, and started walking. Our house wasn't far, 5 miles maybe, but the snow had begun to stick in thick clumps, and every step became a negotiation between balance and determination. Cars passed slowly, their tires slicing through the slush, but no one slowed down. My boots were soaked within minutes. I remember looking at the reflections of holiday lights on car windows, wondering how many families were on their way to warm homes and dinners, and realizing for the first time in years that I wasn't one of them. That walk wasn't long in distance, but it was long in understanding. I kept replaying her voice in my head. "Oh no, we thought you were in the other car." The softness of it didn't match the cruelty behind it. It was a performance, just convincing enough for someone who wanted to believe they still mattered. But I didn't want to believe anymore. I wanted clarity. Halfway through the walk, I ducked into a small cafe that was miraculously still open. The girl at the counter raised her eyebrows when she saw me, shivering, wet boots squeaking on the floor, holding 3 heavy bags and a face I couldn't quite compose. "Long night," she asked, handing me a paper cup of hot chocolate without charging me. "Something like that," I replied, my voice lower than I expected. I chose a corner table and plugged in my phone. The battery was down to 15%. Notifications flooded in. I scrolled past a few rideshare alerts, junk emails, and finally, one message from Jessica, my stepsister, posted in our family group chat. The caption read, "OMG, it worked. We finally left her at the mall like we planned. You should have seen her face." My fingers froze, hovering just above the screen. The sentence blinked back at me, casual and cruel, like a joke made by someone who didn't think I was still in the room. Then another message followed immediately after. "Wait, wrong chat. Delete that." I sat there, silent, surrounded by the gentle hum of an espresso machine and holiday music that now sounded mocking. The hot chocolate had gone cold in my hand. I wasn't just forgotten, I was targeted, planned, laughed at. It wasn't just Janelle. It wasn't just Jessica. It was all of them. A shared joke, a shared silence, a shared decision to leave me behind while pretending it was an oversight. The pattern had been there for years. The last-minute vacation cancellations, the changed dinner times, the birthday cakes that somehow didn't include my favorite flavor. I used to convince myself it was coincidence or forgetfulness, because the alternative meant accepting something colder than December air, that they didn't want me there in the first place, that I had simply refused to notice. I checked the chat history again, scrolling up through weeks of mundane logistics, carpool rotations, grocery lists, reminders about allergy meds, until I noticed a gap. A 2-week period where messages were sparse, vague, missing. Then I opened my email, still logged in from the cafe's Wi-Fi, and found a string of old Google Hangouts notifications, hidden group messages that I had never joined. The titles weren't subtle. One was labeled, "No More Robin." Another said, "Holiday Plan. Just us." My hands were steady now. I took a slow sip from the paper cup and tasted nothing. Not chocolate, not peppermint, just air and realization. My family had made their intentions clear, even if they tried to wrap it in a bow of civility. I looked around the cafe, noticed a man near the window reading a paperback novel, and an older couple sharing a lemon bar. No one knew what had just cracked inside me, but for the first time in a long time, I felt like I did. This wasn't about one night. This was a culmination, and for once, I wasn't going to cry in a parked car or excuse it with "they didn't mean it." They meant it. They executed it. And now it was my turn to respond, not with revenge, with clarity. I texted a single word in the chat, "Brilliant." Then I turned off my phone, gathered my bags, and stepped back into the snow. The snow outside had thickened into wide, falling sheets by the time I stepped out of the cafe. My coat, already damp, clung to my back, but I didn't feel the cold the same way anymore. Something inside me had numbed to the weather. I wasn't rushing. There was no one waiting. I opened my rideshare app again. And though the price had surged, I booked the trip without hesitation. It wasn't about saving money now. It was about giving myself time to think. A small blue car pulled up 5 minutes later, windows fogged from the heater running full blast. The driver, a middle-aged man with kind eyes and a scarf wrapped twice around his neck, leaned over and asked if I was Robin. I nodded and slid into the back seat. "You look like someone who's had a long night," he said as he adjusted the rearview mirror. I gave a small nod and looked out the window. Something like that. We drove in silence for a few minutes, the windshield wipers thudding in rhythm with my thoughts. His voice broke through gently, not pushing but curious. Holiday drama I didn't answer right away. I didn't want to dump my story on a stranger, but sometimes the safest ears are the ones with no stake in the story. "My family left me at the mall," I said quietly, on purpose. He didn't ask why or how. He just nodded, as if he'd seen too many versions of the same thing to be surprised. "I've driven people home from worse," he said. "Doesn't make it right. Just means you're not alone." That hit harder than I expected. I blinked away the sting in my eyes and let the words settle. He dropped me a block away from our house. I needed a few minutes to prepare before walking back into the place I used to call home. Snow crunched beneath my boots as I walked past hedges I had once trimmed. Past the mailbox I had painted 2 summers ago. Past the living room window, still glowing with soft Christmas lights. I paused for a second at the edge of the driveway, then continued walking to the side of the house. My neighbor, Monica, had left her porch light on. I knocked gently. She opened the door, still in her robe, holding a mug of tea. Her eyes widened when she saw me. "Robin, are you okay?" I didn't lie. "Not really. Can I talk?" She opened the door wider and motioned for me to come in. "You want the couch or the guest house?" she asked. I hesitated. "Guest house. If it's okay, I just need a night. Take a week," she said, already grabbing a spare key. Her guest house was small but warm, with a kitchenette, a soft bed, and a shelf of paperbacks no one had touched in years. I dropped my bags in the corner and sat on the edge of the bed, letting the silence fill in where explanations should have been. Monica came by 10 minutes later with a blanket, a bowl of homemade chili, and zero expectations. Eat, sleep, then figure it out, she said before quietly closing the door. I stared at the tree outside the window for a long time. It was strung with soft blue lights, not fancy but steady. That night, I didn't cry. I didn't fall apart. I made a plan. I pulled out my phone and opened the finance app I used to manage the family accounts. For the past 6 years, I had handled every dollar that flowed through that household. I paid utility bills. I organized investment portfolios. I created savings accounts for Eden's college and Logan's braces. One of those accounts, the grocery fund, had close to $20,000 in it. Funded mostly by my own contributions and side consulting work. I didn't touch a cent. I didn't delete anything. I simply froze the card. Janelle had access, but I was still the primary holder. It wasn't about punishment. It was about drawing a line. Then I opened the home security app. Last year, I had installed a smart lock system and linked all devices to my email. I reset the code, just once, just enough for them to know they no longer had uninterrupted access. I wasn't shutting them out forever. I was shutting them out for now. Lastly, I texted Monica. Would it be okay if I stayed a few nights in the guest house? I'll take care of myself. Her reply came fast. You're not alone in this. Stay as long as you need. That sentence, so simple, unraveled something inside me. Not broken, just loosened. The version of me that tolerated small humiliations quietly had left the house long before I did. What remained was someone slower, steadier, and finally ready to protect what she had spent her life giving away for free. The next morning, I woke up earlier than I meant to. My body still thought it had responsibilities to fulfill. Pies to bake, tables to set, tree lights to test one last time before people arrived. But there was no one expecting anything from me now. And for the first time in years, that felt like relief instead of failure. I got dressed, pulled on the same damp boots from the night before, and walked out into the frozen stillness just after dawn. The neighborhood was quiet, blanketed in snow and that holiday hush that settles before kids wake up and adults start pretending everything's okay. I walked past our house without stopping. Lights still glowed inside, soft and yellow and wrong, like they didn't belong to me anymore. I didn't need to see who was already awake. I already knew they weren't looking for me. Instead, I went back to the guest house and made coffee with the little French press Monica kept in the cupboard. I sat by the window and watched the snow fall while I organized my thoughts, not with emotions this time, but with clarity. I opened my laptop and began mapping everything out: my accounts, my contributions, the shared expenses I had taken on over the years without being asked or thanked. I had always done it because I thought that's what people do for family. But now, with distance, I could see how often they let me take care of everything because it was convenient, not because they respected me for it. By mid-morning, the notifications started, one from the smart lock system, alerting me that someone was entering incorrect access codes at the front door, then 2 missed calls from my dad, then a series of texts from Janelle, starting with false concern and ending in irritation. I didn't respond. I wasn't ready to. The doorbell rang at Monica's house around noon. It was my father. He looked like he hadn't slept. He was holding a tray of cinnamon rolls, the kind I used to make every Christmas morning. I didn't let the tray soften me. I stepped outside and closed the door behind me. He asked what was going on, said the family was worried, asked if this was about the ride from the mall. I looked him in the eye and said quietly, "I saw the message, Dad. the one Jessica sent. His face went still. For a second, he didn't blink. Then he looked down at the snow-covered ground and said he didn't know anything about a message. I told him I had screenshots. I told him this wasn't just about being left behind. It was about years of being cut out, overlooked, pushed aside until I became invisible in the very home I helped hold together. He said it was a misunderstanding. I said it wasn't. He said we could talk after dinner. I said I wouldn't be there. He left the cinnamon rolls on the porch step. I didn't bring them in. Monica opened the door behind me and asked if I wanted company. I didn't answer right away, but a few hours later. I sat at her kitchen table eating leftover pasta and laughing at a joke her son told without even trying to be funny. For the first time in a long time, I was in a house where no one expected anything from me except honesty and presence. It was strange how quiet that kind of safety felt. Later that evening, I returned to the guest house and did something I never thought I'd do. I started packing, not in anger, not in a rush, but with intention, clothes, documents. My grandmother's necklace, the framed photo of my mom and me from the summer I turned 16. I left behind the gifts I'd bought for them, the ones I had spent hours researching, ordering, wrapping with care and hope. I didn't want them anymore, not because they didn't deserve presents, but because I finally understood that my presence had always been the real gift, and they had treated it like an afterthought. Before I went to bed, I wrote a note and slipped it into the mailbox outside our house. It was short. I saw Jessica's message. I know it wasn't an accident. I've moved out. Please don't contact me tonight. We can talk after the holidays. Robin, I didn't want them to think I was having a meltdown or trying to punish them. I wanted them to understand this was a decision, a calm, permanent shift in the way I'd let myself be treated. The house might still be warm, the dinner still cooking, the tree still lit, but I was already gone. That night, the wind howled louder than the night before. I lay awake in the guest house, watching shadows shift along the ceiling as branches swayed against the window pane. I kept my phone on silent, face down on the dresser, even though it vibrated every few minutes. 17 missed calls, 32 unread messages, most from my father, some from Janelle, bouncing between passive concern and quiet blame. The last few came from Jessica. Her first messages were panicked, full of fake confusion and obvious lies. But then one came through that almost made me sit up in bed. I didn't mean for it to go that far. I was just mad. It was supposed to be a joke. I'm sorry. She hadn't sent it to a group chat. She had sent it to me directly. No excuses this time. Just a threadbare apology taped together by guilt and immaturity. It didn't make me feel better. It made me feel tired, because once again, I was being asked to carry the emotional weight of someone else's damage. In the morning, I got dressed in silence, made coffee, and ignored the fact that the cinnamon rolls were still on the porch where my father had left them. I wasn't angry anymore. Anger had already burned out and left something colder behind. I wasn't punishing anyone. I was simply done participating in a performance where my role was always the reliable one. I opened my laptop again and returned to the spreadsheet. I listed every shared account I had access to, every line of financial support I had extended, every favor disguised as obligation. Over the years, I had paid more than I ever admitted, even to myself. It wasn't just groceries and tuition deposits. It was bailing out late property taxes when Janelle forgot. It was covering Eden's extracurricular travel expenses because she didn't want her friends to know the family budget wasn't unlimited. It was fixing the leak in the upstairs bathroom when my dad didn't want to deal with contractors. It was paying to replace the tires on Janelle's car and never being paid back. All of it, done quietly. Done under the idea that being needed was the closest I'd ever get to being valued. I didn't want revenge. I wanted boundaries, real ones. Not just emotional, but practical. I began the process of separating my finances from theirs. I contacted the bank, changed account access where legally permissible, and scheduled meetings to remove myself as a co-signer on recurring accounts. It wasn't dramatic. It was administrative, but every click, every confirmation felt like reclaiming a small piece of air I hadn't realized I'd been breathing through someone else's filter. By afternoon, I had packed 2 suitcases and 3 boxes. I didn't go back into the house. I didn't want to walk through those rooms and pretend I still belonged. Instead, I called a moving service and asked them to pick up the rest next week when I could be there to supervise. I found an apartment listing not far from my office, small, light-filled, available immediately. I scheduled a tour for the next morning. Monica offered to come with me. I thanked her, but said no. This part I needed to do alone. Around 6 that evening, the doorbell rang again. Monica answered and came to the guest house with a cautious look. "It's your dad," she said quietly. "He wants to talk, just you and him." I stood by the window for a moment, watching him on the porch. He looked older than usual, hunched slightly in his winter coat, the tray of untouched cinnamon rolls still sitting next to him. I opened the door but didn't invite him in. He didn't try to force it. I didn't know what they planned. He said, "I swear I didn't." I believed him, not because he was convincing, but because his blindness had never been malicious, just weak. That's the problem. I said, "You never know. You never ask. You never see it until I'm already gone." He looked at me, something in his face shifting, not defensiveness, not yet understanding, but a crack forming where truth could get in. "What do you want me to do?" he asked. It wasn't angry or exasperated. It was tired. I didn't respond right away. I watched the light flicker across the snow-covered lawn, listened to the wind pushing dry leaves against the sidewalk, and said, "I want you to notice the difference between me being present and me just being useful." That night, I didn't wait for another apology. I didn't expect a sudden transformation. I simply turned off the lights, curled up on the couch with the blanket Monica had left, and let the quiet of my own space become something solid, not temporary, not borrowed, mine, because no one was coming to rescue me. And strangely, that realization didn't feel like abandonment. It felt like freedom. The apartment was smaller than I'd imagined, but something about its blank walls and tall windows felt like a clean page I hadn't touched in years. The tour lasted 15 minutes. The leasing agent showed me where the washer unit hid behind a sliding door and how the blinds worked on a remote. I nodded politely, signed the documents, and paid the deposit before noon. By that afternoon, the keys sat heavy in my coat pocket, like proof that I was capable of starting over without asking permission. Monica helped me move the first 2 boxes. She didn't say much, just placed a small welcome plant on the kitchen island and made sure the fridge was running. Then she left quietly, with the same kind of kindness that didn't ask for attention or credit. That night, I slept on a mattress still wrapped in plastic, surrounded by half-unpacked bags, a single lamp, and a deep sense of something I couldn't name yet. It wasn't peace exactly. It was distance, and it was necessary. The following days passed in quiet motion. I divided my time between organizing the apartment, attending remote work meetings, and meeting with a financial advisor I had quietly contacted months ago but never followed up with. He helped me disentangle what I had once merged too carelessly with my family's affairs. With his help, I filed the paperwork to create a personal trust, not to hide money, not to punish anyone, but to reclaim ownership of everything I had built while trying to earn a seat at a table that had never really been mine. I updated my will. I changed my emergency contacts. I opened new accounts with my name only. It was like watching a version of myself slowly step out of someone else's shadow. My father called twice that week. I answered neither. He left a voicemail the second time. It wasn't angry. It wasn't sad. It was short. Just wanted to check you're okay. We miss you. Call when you're ready. He didn't say I'm sorry. He didn't mention the mall. And I didn't call him back. Not because I hated him, but because I needed space without strings attached. I needed to know what my life sounded like without the constant buzz of being responsible for everyone else's comfort. Jessica sent another message. Longer this time. She said she regretted how it all unfolded, admitted she'd been jealous, said it had started as a joke she couldn't stop. She asked if we could talk. She said she missed me. I read it twice and closed the app without replying. I wasn't ready to be her older sister again, just because guilt showed up too late. One morning, I walked to the corner coffee shop and bumped into Ellie, a former coworker I hadn't seen since the fundraiser season 3 years ago. She blinked twice before realizing it was me, then hugged me before asking why I looked like someone who had just changed her entire life. I smiled. Something like that, I said. The same words I'd used with the driver on Christmas Eve. Ellie and I sat by the window with lattes and low expectations. She updated me on old office gossip, and I told her I had moved. I didn't go into detail. I just said I needed a new space to breathe. She nodded. I remember how you always held everything together for everyone else. She said, "Did anyone ever ask if you needed help?" Her words landed harder than I expected. That night, I walked around the apartment barefoot, letting the silence settle into something soft instead of sharp. I took the Christmas gifts I had originally bought for my family, unwrapped them carefully, and rewrapped them in neutral paper. The next day, I dropped them off at the children's hospital where my mother had once volunteered before her stroke. The nurse didn't ask questions. She simply smiled, said thank you, and placed them in a pile beside a tree made of paper snowflakes. I didn't wait to see the kids open them. I didn't need to. I was no longer giving for the sake of being seen. When I got home that night, the apartment felt less foreign. The boxes were mostly gone, the shelves still half empty, but the air was clear. I lit a candle, poured a glass of wine, and sat near the window where I could watch the snow fall over the city. My phone buzzed once more. Another message from my dad. "Can we talk this weekend?" Just us. I stared at it for a long time. He hadn't pressured. He hadn't asked me to fix anything. And maybe that was enough of a shift to try. I typed back one sentence. Coffee shop on Main, Sunday at 10. Then I put the phone down and turned back to the window, letting the city's quiet hum fill the room for the first time in years. I didn't feel like I was bracing for something. I just felt still. Sunday came with sharp, cold, and pale light across the sidewalk. I arrived at the coffee shop 10 minutes early and chose the table near the window. Not out of sentiment, but because it gave me a clear view of who approached. I wore a dark wool coat and brought nothing but my phone and a simple notebook, not to write in, but to keep my hands from fidgeting. At exactly 10 a.m., my father walked in. No coat, just a sweater and the look of someone unsure if he should smile. I didn't stand up. I nodded once and motioned to the chair across from me. He sat quietly, ordered nothing, and placed both hands on the table like he was waiting for judgment. But I wasn't there to deliver that. I was there to confirm that boundaries could live outside of anger. For a few moments, we sat in silence, the low hum of machines and small talk filling in the space between us. He cleared his throat once before finally speaking. "Robin, I'm sorry." I didn't reply. I waited. He continued, "Not just for what happened at the mall. I didn't know they planned that, but that's not the point. I should have known. I should have been paying more attention." I watched him carefully, not for performance, but for effort. He wasn't defensive. He wasn't rushing through discomfort. He was sitting in it. That mattered. I asked him if he remembered last Thanksgiving, the one where I arrived at 3 sharp, as planned, only to find them already finishing dinner. He looked down, nodded slowly. "We told you it got pushed for Logan's practice," he said. I didn't correct him. I just said I knew then that something had shifted, but I hadn't wanted to face it. He looked at me, this time not with shame, but something more unsettling. Recognition. "You always made it easier for me to ignore things." He admitted, "You took care of everything, handled the money, managed the tone of the room. I never had to choose sides because you never made me." I let that sit. Then I said, "That was the problem." He apologized again, this time for letting Janelle's discomfort become my responsibility. He said she confessed to knowing about the plan, said she didn't initiate it, but didn't stop it either. I wasn't surprised. I had always known her silence held more power than her words. Jessica said it was her idea. He added, "But I think it was a pattern she learned, not one she invented." I nodded, slowly. Then I said what I had rehearsed in my head for days. "I'm not coming back to the house. I'm not managing the finances. I'm not trying to fix relationships that were built on convenience." His shoulders dropped slightly, like a truth had landed without knocking him over. "I figured," he said, "but I hoped maybe you'd change your mind." I told him I didn't need him to fix everything. I just needed him to finally see that I wasn't asking to be accepted anymore. I was accepting myself, whether or not they came along. He sat back, folded his hands, and asked if we could still have lunch together once a week. Just us. No family talk. No expectations. I thought about it, and then I said yes, because I didn't hate him. I just couldn't carry him anymore. He smiled faintly and looked relieved in a way that didn't beg for anything more. We left the coffee shop without hugging. It wasn't cold. It was respectful. 2 people finally understanding each other as adults without demanding more than the moment could hold. I watched him walk to his car and didn't feel the usual sting of guilt for keeping my distance. I felt calm. That afternoon, I went back to the apartment and opened a box I hadn't touched since the move. Inside were old Christmas decorations I had kept from before the remarriage, a chipped ceramic star, a photo ornament of my mother holding me as a baby, a glass dove with one wing slightly cracked. I placed each on the small pine tree I had bought from the corner lot last week, the one no one else had wanted because it leaned slightly to the left. When I plugged in the lights, the room didn't sparkle, but it glowed, softly and unevenly. It was enough. That night, I sat by the window with tea and let my mind drift. The text messages had slowed. The calls had stopped. The house I grew up in was no longer my address. And somehow, I wasn't grieving. I was resting, not from loss, but from pretending. And in that quiet space, I didn't feel alone. I felt real. A few days before New Year's, Monica invited me over for a casual dinner. Nothing fancy, she said. Just comfort food and the kind of silence that didn't require explanation. I brought a bottle of wine and a salad I barely touched. Her 2 kids were bickering over who got the bigger brownie, and her mother told the same story she always did about burning cranberry sauce on purpose during the 80s. The whole evening lasted 2 hours, maybe less, but I walked home feeling like I had just witnessed something precious. Not because it was perfect, but because no one in that room was performing. They were just showing up. I didn't say much. I mostly listened, laughed where it felt honest, and left before anyone could make me feel like I owed them more than my presence. When I returned to the apartment, I found 3 new messages, one from Eden, short and nervous, asking if I was really not coming back. One from Janelle, asking if I would at least consider dropping off the tree she had picked out for the living room, and one from Jessica that was different from the others. I know what I did was awful, she wrote, but I was angry because I felt like no matter what I did, Dad always listened to you more. You were always calm, always in control, and I hated that. I'm not asking you to forgive me yet. I just want you to know I'm sorry. I stared at it for a while. It wasn't enough, but it also wasn't nothing. I didn't reply. That week, I received a call from the moving company confirming they had picked up the last of my things from the old house. They asked where to deliver the final box labeled office and books. I gave them the new address and ended the call. Just like that, the last physical tie had been transferred. I stood in my kitchen, holding a chipped mug, and realized I didn't even remember what half of that box contained. Somewhere between unpaid labor and emotional cleanup, I had left pieces of myself scattered in drawers, closets, and group chats where no one knew how to read between the lines. And now, for the first time, I wasn't planning around their needs. I was planning my own time. On New Year's Eve, I didn't host a party. I didn't attend one either. I turned off my notifications, made a small meal, and opened the windows at midnight to let the air move through my space. The fireworks in the distance lit up the city in brief flashes, but I didn't reach for my phone. I didn't need to record proof that I was okay. I just needed to live like I was. I poured myself a glass of water, not champagne, and made one quiet toast. To peace that doesn't ask for permission. To leaving the table when love starts to look like debt. The next morning, I received one final group message from the old family thread. It came from Janelle. We're having dinner tonight. Just a small one. You're welcome to come by. If you want. There were no emojis, no guilt, just an invitation, floating without weight. I thought about it for a second, then pressed leave chat and closed the app. The invitation didn't hurt. It didn't tempt me. It simply reminded me that I had always been the one filling the table, setting the tone, and fixing the awkward silence when others failed to carry it. But this dinner didn't need me, and I didn't need to be needed. Later that day, I met Ellie for lunch at a place downtown she had recommended. She asked how things were going. I told her the truth. I said I wasn't angry anymore, just done. I said I didn't want apologies that came with strings or reconciliation that required more work than healing. She smiled and said it sounded like I'd finally stopped asking for permission to exist. I nodded. Quietly, I used to think being left out was the worst thing. I said, now I realize being tolerated might have been worse. Ellie raised her glass to no longer being the glue, and we clinked our glasses without irony. That night, I sat under the soft glow of my own living room lamp, reading a book I'd been meaning to start for years. The apartment was still half bare, still quiet in that new way, but it felt like mine. I didn't miss the noise. I didn't miss the chaos, disguised as closeness. I just missed the version of me I had buried to make other people feel whole. And now that I had pulled her back into the light, I wasn't going to let her disappear again. It was mid-January when my father texted again, asking if we could meet somewhere neutral. No pressure, he wrote, just to check in, if I was open to it. I waited a day before answering, not out of strategy, but because I needed to be sure I wasn't agreeing out of habit. I said yes, offered a quiet park near the lake, the same place he used to take me after my mother died, when neither of us had the words to describe what was missing. This time, I chose the spot deliberately, not to rewind anything, but to acknowledge how far we'd come from pretending everything was fine. We met on a cloudy afternoon. He brought coffee, not because he thought I needed it, but because he remembered I used to prefer black, no sugar. We sat on a bench facing the water. Ducks moved along the edges of the shore, and the wind kept us honest. He didn't open with questions. He just sat with his hands resting flat on his knees, like he had come to listen. After a few minutes, he started talking. Not about guilt or what went wrong, but about patterns. How he had grown up thinking that silence fixed tension, that avoidance preserved peace, that love could be assumed without being expressed. He said he didn't expect forgiveness, but he was trying to learn what accountability felt like when it wasn't demanded but offered freely. I didn't interrupt. I didn't rush to comfort him. I just let him speak. When he finished, I told him I didn't hate him. I told him I just couldn't live inside a system where I had to disappear to be respected. He nodded slowly, like he had known it for a while but needed to hear it said aloud. Then he asked the only question that mattered. Is there any part of you that wants to rebuild something with me? I told him yes. But it wouldn't look like before. It wouldn't mean holidays or shared group chats or me managing other people's chaos. It would look like lunch once in a while, a text that didn't expect immediate replies, and honesty even when it was inconvenient. That was all I had to give. And if that wasn't enough, I understood. He said it was more than enough. It was the first real boundary I'd ever drawn where someone didn't walk away. Back at the apartment, I didn't feel lighter, but I did feel steadier. I had made space for a connection without surrendering myself in the process. That night, I updated my calendar to include a weekly block called non-negotiable rest. It wasn't a dramatic change, just a practical reminder that nothing was owed to anyone who confused my effort with availability. A few days later, I received a short letter in the mail. No return address, but I knew the handwriting. Jessica. The envelope had no apology in bold, no grand declarations, just a folded note with a sentence that felt more real than anything she had texted before. I understand now why you left. She wrote, I used to think you were trying to control everything. Now I realize you were the only one trying to hold it together. There was no ask, no guilt, no strings. I didn't reply. But I didn't throw the letter away either. I tucked it in the back of my notebook, not as closure, but as proof that change doesn't always have to be loud to be honest. That weekend, I invited Ellie, Monica, and a few colleagues over for dinner. Nothing formal, just soup, fresh bread, and wine. We sat around the table, mismatched chairs and all, sharing stories about small things that felt big in the moment. No one asked for perfection. No one waited for me to fix the rhythm of the room. We just let the conversation stretch and settle. At one point, Monica toasted, "To the kind of family that doesn't need to vote you in," she said, raising her glass with a wink. We all laughed, not because it was a punchline, but because it was true. Later that night, I sat on the floor beside the new bookshelf I had built earlier that week. I ran my fingers along the spines of novels I had bought but never opened, always too busy curating joy for people who mistook it for background noise. Now I had time, not because someone gave it to me, but because I stopped giving it away to people who didn't notice the cost. The final message came 2 days later. "Janelle," one sentence. "I see now how much we took from you." I stared at it for a long time. Then I archived the thread, not to erase the past, just to stop letting it interrupt the present. That was the moment I knew. I hadn't just walked away from a house that didn't hold me. I had walked back into myself, and this time, I was staying. The following Christmas came quickly, though I no longer measured the year by who was coming to dinner or whether the seating chart would cause tension. December arrived with early snow and a kind of silence I'd grown to welcome. I didn't decorate the way I used to. No themes, no 12-dish menus. Just a small tree I picked out alone. Not because it was symmetrical or photogenic, but because it looked like it needed someone to choose it without asking why. I set it up in the corner of my living room near the window, using the same box of ornaments from last year, the ones I had taken with me when I left and never gave back. The ceramic star, the glass dove, the photo of my mother and me. None of it matched, but together it made sense. On Christmas Eve, Ellie and Monica came over with cinnamon rolls and too many blankets. Ellie had picked up handmade gifts from a local market, and Monica brought paper snowflakes cut by her kids that she insisted we tape to the windows. We played music low enough to talk over and took turns sharing the small victories of the year. I didn't bring up the mall, the house, or the group chat I'd left behind. I didn't need to. That version of the story had finished itself long ago. What mattered now was the one I was living. Quiet, clean, earned. At one point in the evening, Monica noticed the star on top of my tree and asked if it was from my childhood. I nodded and told her my mother had made it during an art therapy class while recovering from her second stroke. She looked at it for a moment, then said, "It's not perfect, but it holds." I smiled. Exactly. Later, after they had both gone home, I stood in the middle of my apartment, barefoot on the hardwood, and let myself acknowledge how far I had come. I had not been rescued. I had not won anyone back. I had simply chosen to stay with myself when no one else did. And that was the kind of survival people forget to applaud. On Christmas morning, I walked to the hospital down the street and dropped off a box of books and puzzles I had collected throughout the year. The nurse at the front desk recognized me from last winter and asked if I was still with the foundation. I told her no, that I had stepped away to build something of my own. She asked what kind of work I was doing now, and I said I hadn't figured out how to name it yet, but that it involved stories, financial clarity, and helping women rebuild after emotional burnout. She said that sounded like exactly what people needed. That afternoon, while sipping tea by the window, my phone lit up with one final message. It was from Jessica. Not long, not dramatic, just an update. "I'm starting therapy next month. I used your old spreadsheet to finally make a budget. Thank you for always leaving the map. Even when we didn't deserve the direction." I read it once. I didn't reply, but I didn't delete it either. I let it sit there. proof that growth doesn't always require reconciliation. Sometimes it just needs distance and a little time to grow legs of its own. As the light shifted across the floor and the tree twinkled in that soft, unpolished way it always had, I thought about how different this version of Christmas felt. Not empty, not lonely, just free. No one had sent invitations I couldn't decline. No one had expected me to bring the magic, or smooth the silences, or decorate the dinner table around someone else's ego. I was not the glue anymore. I was the space. And in that space, I had room to breathe, to rest, to begin again without asking for applause. That evening, my father sent a message. Dinner at our house tonight, smaller than last year, less noise, 2 extra seats if you want one. I didn't feel anger or sadness when I read it. I felt clarity. He had finally stopped asking me to fix what broke. He had simply opened a door, but I had already chosen mine. I sent a brief reply. Thank you. Maybe next year. Then I looked back at my tree, slightly tilted as always, and knew for certain it didn't need to be in the corner of a perfect house to feel like it belonged. It just needed a home that wouldn't ask it to dim its light. Have you ever walked away from a place that made you small, only to find more space than you thought possible? Share your story in the comments, and if this one stayed with you, like, subscribe, and send it to someone who might need a quiet reminder you are not hard to love. You are just standing in the wrong room.